Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Is the Maharashtra government right to make the screening of Marathi films mandatory at prime time? Or is this an invasion of the right of theatre owners to show what they want? That's the discussion in part 2. But first, the PM's weekend comments about judges not being fearless and coming under pressure from activists or public opinion. Was that a fair and justified comment, or prejudice that could malign the judiciary? And at the very least, does Mr. Modi need to explain what he meant? That's our first debate tonight. And joining me to discuss the Prime Minister's comments about the judiciary and the response to them are two top Supreme Court lawyers. They are Prashant Bhushan and Dushyant Dave. We also have the former Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, Mukul Mudgal. And joining us soon, BJP spokesperson GVL Narasimha Rao. Justice Mudgal, in a speech to India's top judges on Sunday, Prime Minister Modi said, and I'm quoting, "The judiciary is not as fearless today as it used to be 10 years back." And then the Prime Minister added, "Are five-star activists not driving the judiciary? Judges fear what the reaction of five-star activists would be when they render justice as per law and as per the Constitution." Now, before we come to the Prime Minister's comments about activists, I want to ask you, is the Prime Minister right in saying that judges today are not as fearless as they used to be? Would you agree or would you disagree?
No, I may not agree over there, but I would like to say one thing. There is a common feeling among litigants that media-savvy persons, celebrities, get justice much faster. Their bail petitions are heard immediately, and the under trial who is poor, who doesn't have resources, does not get justice in time. Now, if this perception driven could be traced to this, fearless, I wouldn't say so. I don't think it is proper to say that the judges are afraid.
I'll take up the second thing first and I'll come to this perception problem later. So you're saying that when the Prime Minister says that judges are not as fearless as they were 10 years ago, you disagree with the Prime Minister. Am I correct?
I disagree for the reason that you go through the record of the judiciary in 2G, in the coal matters, many other matters. It has always been fearless and it hasn't bothered as to who the accused is. And I think this is what makes the judiciary absolutely respected in the country.
Prashant Bhushan, sticking to this point about judges not being fearless, surely the truth is that the Supreme Court, the way it behaved during the emergency 40 years ago, was much more likely to bend and bow down. That behavior thereafter has never been seen. So is the Prime Minister, when he talks about judges being more fearful today, less so earlier, actually wrong both about the present judiciary and the past judiciary?
No, I think he is wrong there. Of course, we have not had the emergency-like situation repeated in the country, because emergency was a peculiar situation where 1 lakh people were put in jail for just being dissidents, etc., and therefore even judges got afraid at that time. However, you see, what the Prime Minister is trying to do by this statement is really to put them in fear and to try and intimidate the judges and the judiciary into not doing the kind of public interest activism that the judiciary has been doing lately. That is activism against corruption, activism against environmental destruction, activism against human rights violations like the Gujarat riots, etc. So the Prime Minister is trying to send a very clear, calculated message to the judiciary that it should not be as active as it has been, and is using this term five-star activists or the judiciary responding to five-star activists in order to send that message to the judiciary, which to my mind amounts to really contempt of court.
Dushyant Dave, you heard Justice Mudgal say that in fact there have been a whole series of recent judgments that show that the judiciary is totally fearless. 2G, the coal scam case, the conviction of Jayalalitha, a sitting chief minister, Section 66A, even earlier, Justice Shah's landmark judgment on homosexuality, although sadly that got overturned. Would you accept the second point made by Prashant Bhushan, that actually what the Prime Minister is doing is to send a message which Prashant believes is an intimidatory message, so that judges do not take up public interest litigations and tread into areas where the government's actions or actions of individual politicians are questioned?
Well, there are two ways of looking at it. I really wish the Prime Minister had spoken about those judges who, out of, for whatever reasons that they are, have given orders in favor of top BJP politicians, those judges who have been since rewarded with high constitutional positions. So first and foremost, the Prime Minister has really picked some people totally out of context. You must realize one thing, that judiciary has a role to play in this country. Separation of power is absolutely a basic cornerstone of our constitution, and judiciary has to be completely independent of the executive. Prime Minister's statement, I would agree with Mr. Prashant Bhushan, is really unfortunately an extremely sorry reflection of his perception of judiciary, because he is actually telling judiciary that you are not deciding matters by law or by constitution, but deciding out of fear about these so-called five-star activists. Now, I don't know of any five-star activists. In fact, the nation should be grateful. I disagree with my friend Prashant Bhushan more often than not. But yet I must say that likes of him have brought about in 2G and Colgate alone more than 5 to 10 lakh crores to the nation. Where was BJP, where was Congress, or where was any other political party when all these mines were being given out to crony capitalists by the state governments run by BJP and by the central government run by the Congress and its allies? So frankly, Prime Minister's statement does a great disservice to judiciary, and it is really undoubtedly a clear indication to the judiciary that do not intervene in public interest litigation, which really will be a very, very sorry state of affairs in respect of the relationship between the two.
Dushyant Dave, you began by in fact saying that the Prime Minister should have named judges who had given judgments in favor of BJP leaders and then gone on to get constitutional posts as a reward. I think that was almost word to word what you said. Did you have the former Chief Justice who's thereafter become Governor of Kerala in mind? It sounded very much as if you did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look at the situation in the country, that, people like Mr. Amit Shah get a discharge in a murder case because of, transfer of 4 judges in Bombay by the Chief Justice contrary to Supreme Court's directions. And you have here Teesta Setalvad, who is running for cover because she is helping the victims of the riot, cases. Now look at the situation. The 2 judges who were going to hear Teesta Setalvad's case, both had invited Prime Minister Modi to their homes for weddings of their children. I was present there at both the cases. In fact, this bonhomie between the judges and the Prime Minister is really a serious matter to be debated. I think judges have brought upon themselves this situation where Prime Minister has the courage to attack them and say you are not deciding independently and you are not fearless. But who is responsible? Judges and the politicians both.
GV Narasimha, I want to pick up on that last point made there by Dushyant Dave, because in fact the same point was made by the Times of India today as well. The paper points out that Mr. Modi's comment about judges not being fearless was made in the wake of the Chief Justice changing 2 judges in the Teesta Setalvad case because they had invited the Prime Minister to their children's weddings. In fact, the paper goes further and says that also in the background to the Prime Minister's comment about judges not being fearless is the Supreme Court having appointed an SIT to inquire into allegations of his involvement in the alleged murder of Ehsan Jafri, and that this was again done because the case was brought by activists. Is that why today the Prime Minister is speaking the way he is? Because that's being suggested by the Times of India and now very clearly by Dushyant Dave as well. Is that the Prime Minister's motivation?
I think I find it so strange that everyone is giving an interpretation of their own to the whole issue, and the 2 advocates on the panel I think are making highly incriminating accusations against judiciary. I think the Prime Minister as the chief executive, as the head of government, he was only articulating certain developmental concerns. And there is a lot of background to the whole thing. I'm not saying something which has not been in public debate over the past few months. I think the government, I think these comments are not alluding towards the likes of Prashant Bhushan, who are trying to get them applied to themselves for getting some media attention.
I'm interrupting you.
These are certainly meant for the five-star activists, the foreign-funded NGOs.
What is a five-star activist? Mr. Narasimha Rao, Mr. Narasimha Rao, pause. If you can't get my audio, pause and you get it. You're talking at the same time. What is a five-star?
I'm not getting your audio, Karan.
All right. It's a great shame. I'll get them to reconnect.
I'm not getting your audio at all.
Okay, I'll get them to reconnect. I'll go to someone else. Hopefully, they'll have corrected the problem while I go to someone else. Mr. Justice Mudgal, let's come to the Prime Minister's specific comments about five-star activists and the sort of petitions they move in court. He clearly seems to suggest that he believes activists don't have a legitimate role to play, that the sort of cases they bring to court are motivated. In fact, sadly, today's Hindustan Times sometimes even supports the Prime Minister and its leader because it says sometimes PILs are used to settle personal scores. Now, is the Prime Minister justified in his skepticism of activists and the cases they bring, or is he revealing prejudice? Which is it, Justice Mudgal?
I think I'm getting a lot of disturbance. Could you please repeat your question?
Yes.
I'm getting a lot of disturbance. Could you repeat your question?
I will indeed. Justice Mudgal, the Prime Minister clearly shows an attitude that suggests he doesn't believe...
Hello?
Justice Mudgal, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Justice Mudgal, the Prime Minister's attitude suggests that he believes activists don't have a role to move PILs in court, that they move PILs with motivation. Is he justified in his skepticism, or is he revealing prejudice?
No, I don't think omnibus criticism of activists is justified. Undoubtedly, there are some people who move PIL for oblique reasons, for collateral reasons. If the comment is meant at such PILs, it is justified. But if it is meant against activists in general, I don't think the comment is called for.
What the problem, Justice Mudgal, is the Prime Minister simply used that catchy phrase, five-star activist. He didn't explain what he meant. Unfortunately, nor did Mr. Narasimha Rao a moment ago. So when you talk of five-star activists, it's deliberately vague, it's deliberately general. Surely, is it becoming or is it unbecoming of a Prime Minister to label activists in this way and then target them?
No, I don't think, as I'd like to say one thing in the beginning, throughout our constitution functioning, the judiciary and the state executive have always had a bit of friction, which is good for democracy. Even the previous Prime Minister complained of judicial activism. This is bound to go on. I don't think there's anything which we can get worried about as far as that is concerned. But I have not understood the term five-star activist. It is generally the five-star lawyers who appear defending such cases filed by the activists. So I don't know what exactly is meant by five-star activist. My view is you have all the top lawyers defending the PILs, so maybe they are the five-star lawyers.
Well, at the very least, the Prime Minister needs to explain what he meant and needs to explain who he had in mind. But Prashant Bhushan, many people believe that the sort of person the Prime Minister had in mind was someone like you, because you moved PILs which brought the 2G case to court, which brought Colgate to court, which brought the Radia tapes to court, and many other equally prominent cases. Are you a five-star activist who is influencing justice in the wrong way or in an undesirable way? I'm asking you that bluntly. Do you think the PM had you in mind, and do you think he believes you're doing a disservice to the nation?
Well, if he feels that a lot of my public interest cases are directed against five-star companies and Prime Minister's five-star cronies like Adani, etc., then he is right. But if he is calling me or if he is calling the activists on whose behalf I take up these cases to be five-star activists, then I don't know what he is talking about, because firstly, all the activists that I have taken up various cases for, whether there are environmental cases, human rights cases, corruption cases, etc., are all people who are by and large live a very modest life. They have spent enormous amounts of their time and energy in order to take up these public interest causes. I have done their cases pro bono. I have not charged a single paisa for a single public interest case that I have ever done in my life. And these cases have led to enormous public benefit by way of saving the country from environmental destruction, by way of stopping the loot of our public resources worth lakhs of crores, by way of holding accountable a lot of powerful people who have been involved in human rights violations.
You don't have to justify yourself. And on this program, your credentials are perfectly valid. The cases you brought are justified. The fact is proven by the judgments that you've got in your favor, so you don't have to justify yourself. Let me bring in Dushyant Dave. Dushyant Dave, the Prime Minister unfortunately went one step further. And I want to quote him again. He said, "It is not difficult to dispense justice as per constitution and as per law." But then he added, "But while doing so, judges must differentiate between perception and fact." Now that sort of comment suggests that judges are not making that differentiation and that they are moved or influenced by popular perception rather than by truth and reality. Is that a fair accusation to make against judges? Dushyant Dave? No, we don't have Dushyant Dave at that point. I'm afraid we're having a lot of trouble with equipment today. Justice Mudgal, do you want to come in on that one? Are judges failing to differentiate between perception and fact? Are they swayed by popular opinion rather than by actuality and truth?
Look, there are two facets to it. The judges go by facts, but to the extent the media savvy people get relief faster, the comment is justified.
When you say media savvy people get released faster, and you're making that point for the second time, who are these media savvy people you have in mind?
Well, there are several. I think you will find that top politicians' case, you will find that the activists who feature in media very often, their cases have been taken up very, very speedily.
Well, look, that could be possibly true. Can I interrupt? That could be possibly true if you talk about the cases that Bombay film stars sometimes face. They run on for ages, they get bailed fairly easily. But what about the 2G cases where people like Raja or Kanimudi were in jail for months on end?
No, those judgments are based entirely on facts, not on perception.
So there the Prime Minister is wrong.
If his comment is about those cases. If the comment is about media savvy places, he is right.
In other words, you're accepting that judges are swayed by the celebrity status of the person in front of them. That in other words, they don't treat everyone as equal. They apply different yardsticks for those who are famous and different for those who are not and are poor. You're accepting that, aren't you?
I'm accepting that their cases are taken up much earlier than the cases of poor in many cases. Not all judges, but several judges. Yes.
Mr. Narasimha Rao, there is a certain amount of defense for the Prime Minister's comments coming from a former Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, but many people feel that in fact the Prime Minister has made two attacks on judges. First, he says they're influenced by five-star activists, but he hasn't defined what a five-star activist is. And secondly, he's gone on to say that judges cannot or do not differentiate between perception and fact. Now, should the Prime Minister in public have spoken of the judiciary in this manner?
I think we must all understand that Prime Minister also has, he is entitled to have his opinion. He has not made any accusations against any institution. He has not impugned any motives to anyone, any institution. He has only talked about the larger public debate.
Oh, no,
he has
no.
only highlighted
how... No. Hang on a moment. Hang on.
He's entitled.
You say he hasn't attacked individuals. I agree. He's attacked judges as a collectivity. And he certainly attributed motive when he says judges fear what the reaction of five-star activists would be. He's also clearly attributed motives when he says, and I'm quoting him again, a judge is worried over what is happening outside and thinks whether a judgment should be delivered one way or delivered another way. That's clear attribution
That's the question.
of motive.
He was thinking aloud. He was thinking aloud.
Should PMs think aloud? Should PMs think aloud
Absolutely.
in this damaging
Why
way
not?
about the judiciary?
Why not? These are larger concerns. These are larger concerns that exist in the society. So certainly I think the Prime Minister, as the topmost executive, as the topmost leader of the country, he is entitled, and this is the best platform. He was not talking in a media conference. He was talking to the judges in a conference of judges. So I don't think you can, there is nothing inappropriate about it. And if the Prime Minister does not talk about it, who will?
All right.
I think as the head of the government, I think as the elected head of government, it's his duty to express his own concerns.
Let me put that
and also express them as questions. He has not imputed motives.
Just a moment. I think that there is a clear attribution of motive in the comments. I quoted, you disagree, but others may not disagree with me. Let me bring in Dushyant Dave. He's back with us. Dushyant Dave, in fairness, today's Hindustan Times seems to agree with at least some parts of what the Prime Minister said. In its leader, the paper says, and I'm quoting, there have been several cases, some of them very high profile, in which summons have been issued on flimsy grounds or a person incarcerated for longer than necessary without charges being pressed. And then the paper adds, often the course of justice has seemed to be influenced by the vox populi. In other words, by the voice of the people. Is there some truth to the Prime Minister's comment, shared by Justice Mudgal, that media-savvy people get treated differently? That somehow the judges discriminate going by the celebrity status of the person in front of them?
Well, let me first answer what Mr. Narasimha has said. And I will remind him of what Dr. Ambedkar said on the closing day of the Constituent Assembly debates. And he said, with regard to this matter, I quite agree that the point raised is of greatest importance. There can be no difference of opinion in this House that our judiciary must be both independent of the executive and must also be competent in itself. Now, Prime Minister, as the head of the executive, has no business to make these comments. Let's understand that very clearly. If, God forbid, if the Chief Justice had spoken about the attacks on the minorities in the country today or the inefficiency of the government, hell would have broken out. Chief Justice didn't do that. The Prime Minister, therefore, has really crossed the Lakshman Rekha. And that's where really the point arises for debate. That should the Prime Minister have said such things, he is doing two things. He is not only attacking the judiciary, but he is also giving a warning not to interfere in matters involving government decision making in public interest litigation. Now, in our separation of power theory, the judiciary has to step in when the vacuum is created by the executive in its functioning. If it didn't do, take for example,
Can I interrupt? Dushyant Dave.
Tremendous service.
Can I interrupt? What about the fact that a paper like the Hindustan Times, in its leader today, clearly supports some parts of what the PM has said? In that instance, if the paper agrees with the PM when it says often the course of justice is influenced by the vox populi.
Let me answer that straight away. The Prime Minister's statement is not in respect of that. I have said more than once that the judiciary is definitely hijacked by the rich and the powerful. And in fact, the politicians, including top members of Prime Minister's party, are beneficiary of that. So there is no gainsaying that. But the Prime Minister's statement is not in that respect. The Prime Minister's statement is to tell the judiciary that do not interfere in matters of executive decision making, even in public interest litigation. Now that is an extremely sorry state. If that happens, nobody in this country will be safe. Democracy won't be safe. Rule of law won't be safe.
Prashant Bhushan, the Prime Minister also said, and I'm quoting, a judge is worried over what is happening outside and thinks whether a judgment should be delivered one way or delivered another way. Do judges tailor their judgments with an eye on how it will be received, with an eye on how public opinion will respond and react? Because that's the key in this particular comment.
Well, there are judges and judges. Some judges do get influenced by various things. They get influenced by power. They get influenced by perception. They get also influenced by public opinion. Now, who is in power today? Are activists as powerful or more powerful than the government and these large corporations? Who builds perception in this country? Do activists build perception more than large corporations who own media organizations or the government, which has such enormous power? So therefore, to say that these activists are creating perception or activists have power which the judges are succumbing to is absurd. It's in fact the other way around. It's the people that the activists are fighting against. They have the power to shape perceptions. They are the persons who are in power. They control media organizations. And therefore, the Prime Minister's statement is absurd.
Mr. Narasimha, let me put it like this. There are three things that the Prime Minister has said that are disputed, if not controversial. First of all, when he talks about judges being influenced by five-star activists, that's a slur on judges, and he hasn't defined what a five-star activist is either. Secondly, when he says judges can't differentiate between perception and fact, that seems to suggest they are swayed by perception, they are not doing a proper judicial scrutiny. Thirdly, when he says they are worried about what is happening outside court, which suggests that they tailor their judgments to a particular type of popular response. At the very least, surely the Prime Minister needs to explain what he was trying to say. It's not right for a Prime Minister to cast aspersions on the judiciary, then not explain what he's trying to say and create anguish at the very least, annoyance perhaps as well. So I ask you again, shouldn't the Prime Minister explain what he was trying to say?
I think he was much more than eloquent in his comments. And I think everybody on this panel has interpreted it to the